It's The Comedy Store tonight, starring Argus Hamilton. With tonight's guests, Tim Thomerson, Tim Gaither, and now, live from the Sunset Strip, from the bowels of the world's greatest comedy club, put your hands together for the star of the show, ladies and gentlemen, Argus Hamilton!
Thank you all. Thank you all. Welcome here. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Comedy Store tonight. I'm Argus Hamilton. I want to welcome, first of all, our studio audience for being here, for being indoors. I want to say stay indoors. I saw the weather forecast. Tomorrow it's going to be 105 degrees in Los Angeles with brush fires approaching from 3 directions. I read it in the LA Times and in the book of Revelation. Now, the big story this week that everybody's talking about is Omarosa, the fired White House aide. Today, Omarosa said that President Trump said the N-word. In other words, in other news, the NHL announced there's tapes of Wayne Gretzky playing hockey. This whole Omarosa situation is insane. I mean, let's be honest. Omarosa has been fired more times than a Civil War cannon. You know, President Trump just can't catch a break. He can't. No. His immigrant in-laws just became American citizens. Trump blames the policy of ball and chain migration. Now get this. This is unbelievable. After a fight with his wife, this Utah man today stole a plane and crashed it into his house with her inside it. This just 5 days after a Seattle man stole a jetliner, crashing it into an island. Hey, white guys, enough with the cultural appropriation. More bad news for those poor migrant children stuck at the Mexican border. The Philadelphia priests are on their way to help. If you haven't heard, a grand jury report yesterday said that over 300 Philadelphia priests have molested over 1,000 boys, which in Pennsylvania isn't even the record. I mean, it's so bad that Jesus just tweeted. He wants to clarify what he said when he said, "Let the children come unto me." And hey, everybody, guess what? Stormy Daniels is in the news again. Yeah, she announced yesterday she's going to be on Celebrity Big Brother. Celebrity Little Brother will be positioned right behind her. Now, this is funny. The London tabloids reported yesterday that the James Bond movie producers will not be casting a black man as 007 after all. It was a practical decision. The movie will be set in LA, and he couldn't drive an Aston Martin 50 yards without getting pulled over. Now, in sports, get this, Tiger Woods came within 2 strokes of finishing first in the PGA Championship on Sunday. Later that night, he came within 2 strokes of finishing inside a Waffle House waitress.
Really?
Yeah. Chinese archaeologists, get this, this happened yesterday. Chinese archaeologists announced they may have discovered the remains of Buddha in a 1,500-year-old casket in China. Now, Buddhism has been very big in Los Angeles ever since the late 70s, when the Dalai Lama said that true happiness comes from snorting blow off a hooker's ass. In Pensacola, Florida, a man was charged with drugging and raping alligators. Now listen, being 31 years sober, I can tell you, it's a lot more fun without the drugs. Meanwhile, police are investigating a man, get this, caught on camera at the LA Zoo spanking a hippo. Spanking hippos. I thought they shut that club down. Listen, we've got a terrific show tonight. We've got a sensational headlining comedian, Tim Gaither, with us, and a Comedy Store immortal, Tim Thomerson. So stick around. We've got a ball, a great show for you tonight. I'm Marcus Hamilton. Thank you all very much. Wonderful crowd. Thank you so much. Welcome back to the Comedy Store tonight. It is a lifetime goal of mine to have this next comedian on our show. He was my comedy big brother. He was an absolute legend here in the late 70s at the Comedy Store. He was the king of the hop, folks. He was the only guy that could follow Pryor. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Thomerson.
Thank you. It's pretty lofty company there.
You were absolute smasheroo, and you always looked out for me. You saved my life once at the Comedy Store parking lot.
I did?
Biff Maynard was beating me up within an inch of my life for doing one of his lines. And you walked out and you said, "Okay, Biff, I think he's had enough." And I'm alive today to tell about it.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Yeah. Which lines were those you were doing?
Certainly Shakespeare.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Well, you were, you got out of Vietnam, right?
No, that was Blake Clark was in Vietnam.
You weren't?
No.
You were in the service, though, back in the 60s.
I joined the service in '65 when I got out of high school. I joined the California National Guard to protect the coastline from the VC that were right off there in Santa Barbara.
And California won the war, right?
Yeah, that's right. You bet we did.
You started doing stand-up, though, in about '69 at the Improv in New York?
Well, no, what happened was I started kind of doing stand-up down by Disneyland, Ball Road, off the 5 at a place called the Jolly Ox.
Really?
Yeah, it was a restaurant chain I worked for, and these friends of mine would say, "Why don't you go up there and make faces in front of these people up there and see if you can make them laugh?" And I was already doing it in the service because we'd have to go to Barstow because I was in the guard unit, and we'd have to go to Fort Irwin, which was a tank battalion.
Yeah.
So they used to circle the Jeeps around, and everybody get liquored up and smoke J's, and I just start screaming and yelling at my first sergeant and my lieutenant, and I got some laughs. So and I was always kind of enamored by stand-up comedians.
Who was your hero growing up as a stand-up?
Well, it would have been Jonathan Winters and Guy Marks and Carson, and then when I saw Richard early, he was on. Richard Pryor was on a tuna fish sandwich. Who's the guy that where Letterman used to? Where Letterman? Ed Sullivan.
Oh, Ed Sullivan.
When I saw Richard on Ed Sullivan,
well, that's right. And he was little Richie Pryor doing
Richard Pryor, and I saw that guy's funny, and and that's before he became the Richard Pryor that we knew.
Yeah.
And then so those guys motivated me, and I always thought, well, how do you do stand-up? How do you become a stand-up comic? And I was always a wise ass, and people were laughing at what I said. And being a goofball.
Yeah.
And so then when I moved to Los Angeles up here to try to pursue an acting career, they used to have these showcases around town.
Yeah.
The Ye Little Club. And
you were coached by the great Stella Adler.
Well, I wasn't approached by her. Anthony Zerbe was an acting guy that I had met, and he turned me on to Stella Adler. So I ended up studying a couple summers here with her. But during that time, I started doing these showcases. The Troubadour had one. That's the first time I saw Cheech and Chong.
Yeah.
And I saw Steve Martin saw him first, and that was like in '69 or '70, because he was working for the Smothers Brothers. And then I started doing these showcases. Then after I got out of the service, I moved back to New York and studied at Stella Adler, and I started going down to the Improv and going on at Last.
And that group of, I remember the book, The Last Laugh, talks about that group of comics at the Improv in the late 60s. You'd have Richard Lewis.
Well, now it was 70, 71 by the time I got there, but in the late 60s it had been, it had been Brenner, it had been Klein.
Robert Klein.
Robert Klein, who was always still and brilliant today.
Tremendous, brilliant comic.
Yeah, and well, I met Richard Lewis, Leno, Boozler. Boozler was the door girl at the Improv.
Yeah.
She was working the door, and but I met all those guys, Mike Preminger. Yeah. And then I had finished studying acting, and then I had had enough in New York, so I said, "Oh, I got to come back to California."
Yeah, what's your first memory of the Comedy Store? When you got the Comedy Store opened in '72, and you got on stage here about when?
I got on here, I'd say about '73.
Yeah.
Because I came back from New York in '72.
Yeah.
And I stuck my head in. It was Rudy DeLuca and it was Sammy were running the place then. I just kind of stuck my head in the door and kind of checked it out. Then I went down back home to San Diego and worked construction and stuff. And then came back up here to Los Angeles. And then by that time, Mitzi had been running the place.
Right.
So I waited to go on, and I did whatever the hell I did back then. I didn't really have a complete until later on.
You must have developed it quickly, because in 1974 they were publicizing, one of the studios was publicizing the movie Lenny, Lenny Bruce.
Yes.
And so they staged a contest here.
Right.
Who's the funniest comic in Los Angeles? 1974. I mean, the decade.
Like 5 comics back.
The decade is about to erupt, and it's you, Paul Mooney, and Charles Fleischer in the finals.
Right.
And you.
And there was somebody else too. I think Kip Adana.
Kip Adana might have been. That would have been perfect. He'd have been right in there. But you won, and it got tremendous publicity for the Comedy Store. It put the Comedy Store on the map. What was that night like?
There was a pretty good article in the Los Angeles Times. Michael Tolkien, I think, was the guy that wrote that. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean,
it was unbelievable for a guy like me. Just had only been doing it a couple of years, but had finally honed to act and had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I didn't know I was going to win. And the judges were like Jack Carter and Steve Allen and the gal that played Rhoda, and what was her name?
Valerie
Harper. And so when I won it, I said, really? I mean, I remember I had one of those big stupid turtlenecks and a big corduroy jacket, and
but for our
longtime
comedy fans, I want them to know this is a big deal in '74 because the country is just coming out of the Watergate.
Well, and also the Vietnam War was happening. Saigon hadn't fallen, so there's still guys were still in fighting the war in Vietnam, and I just got out of service, so it was still, America was still very churned up. You know?
And there was much more socially aware comedians back then doing important, statements as well as punchlines.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Paul Mooney.
Paul Mooney. I don't know.
You always say Paul Mooney.
Mooney, he kicked the bucket. I mean, he really, I don't mean he kicked the bucket, he died, but Paul kicked it out more than anybody that I ever saw.
Yeah.
He'd wait to the end of the night and blow everybody out. He didn't care if it was the staff played out there, if the ties were out there, he would perform.
Well, by the time I got here in '76, we would close down the Westwood Club at 1 o'clock and race over to watch Paul do the last hour.
But
don't shortchange yourself, because you have never seen a comic with Tim Thomerson stage presence. You would stand up there. I mean, it's just something God gave you. You would stand up there, and you could do anything you wanted, and the crowd would love you, and they would laugh. And at your set pieces, they would just fall over. I mean, you were the only guy that could follow Pryor, and nobody will ever talk.
Yeah, that was tough duty.
I was there every night.
But well, following Richard was an honor. I mean, he was certainly a comedy hero. You know, he and Jonathan Winters and Robin also. You know, God bless those guys. But just being in, Richard was so good to us, to all of us.
Yeah.
He gave us jobs, and he got us in the movies, and he was his generosity was unbelievable. So it was always a pleasure to just be in the room with him,
yeah,
and just to hang around him and be with Richard. You know?
Yeah, total genius,
unbelievable. But
you were the king of the hop here, and
well,
what was that like? What was that like? Because everywhere Tim Thomerson went, everybody was always Tim. You were Conrad Birdie, okay?
Oh,
you were.
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, how do you? Who's on the show tonight? I don't. You got me there. I don't know. I was just this guy from San Diego who showed up.
Who did a great Bronson.
You know, who did a pretty good Bronson. And
do your Bronson?
No, I don't. I dug 17 tunnels with my face. Anyway, how about bigger rooms than this? I might say.
How about Bronson saying at McDonald's?
I like 35 quarter pounders, a large order of fries, and you don't have any burritos, do you? That pisses me off. I can't even remember my act. No, I pulled it up the other day on the YouTube machine there, and well, I was I was wearing some pretty weird clothes. I had a disco shirt out to there, and yeah. I still have that same hairpiece, though. But anyway, well, you know, to answer that question that you asked me, what was it like to be Tim Thomerson? It's still weird to be Tim Thomerson,
yeah,
you know? And then driving around in the greater Los Angeles area today,
because
Sam, you already.
For as long as you've not done stand-up, 2 months ago we had the memorial for the great Mitzi Shore, you know, who founded the Comedy Store for us, 75 on, and Tim got up for 5 minutes in the main room after all these comics doing TV had been doing their hip, slick, and cool stuff. You went up there and you just brought the house down.
Well, you know, you helped me out too, because you know how nervous I get. I get nervous on these deals. You know, sitting here talking about this.
I reminded you who you are, you know, Mister.
But, oh, get out of the way. I've been on this mountaintop for 3 days now with little Billy here, and well, I've done some things I ain't too proud of. I'm playing to that camera, right? Or would I be playing to these people here? But
the audience was always your best friend, Timmy.
No, they were. Well, you know, they were great audiences, and those were great times, because even though the country was heated up, like it's not heated up today, but it was heated up back then, you know. And then everybody who came through here, David and Richard and Robin and those magical nights up there with Sandra Bernhardt, and I mean, the talent that came through this place was incredible. Yeah, you know, you included.
That was the problem with that HBO series. Is they did I'm Laughing Up Here?
I've never seen it. I don't know. I only want to keep the Western Channel on. And
just had average kind of actors playing us. And man,
there were no average people out in that parking lot back in the 70s, man.
No. There was no charisma out the yin-yang.
No, there was a lot of nefarious things going on.
Because back then, Mitzi Shore would select comics not by how many laughs you got on stage on open mic night. She would select you by your charisma. And then she'd send us over to Westwood to develop the act.
You tuned these guys up. I mean, you and Sam, and then when Jimmy Carey showed up, I mean, I watched Sam develop that whole, you ruined my life, you ruined my life. You know, I saw him do that the first time ever. And the first time I saw Carey, I couldn't believe it. I said, this guy just transformed into a praying mantis, you know.
Unbelievable.
The guy really did, you know. And so the talent that she had an eye for, and I got to hand it to Paulie too. You know, he had some big huevos. You know, she made him earn his spurs, and he did it all on his own too. So I champion him for that. You know.
Yeah.
I got to give him a.
Yeah, he had to go to the Laugh Factory to get Totally Paulie.
You know,
wouldn't give him the time slot.
But you know that's a good mom.
Yeah.
you know, because you don't want to be, you want to guide your children. You don't want to be a friend to your children. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, you took off from the Comedy Store in the early 80s and started doing TV. And
well, I started working in all these weird, you know, like in the 70s, I was a disco guy on TV, and then in the early 80s, I started getting Vietnam guys, and then somewhere in the late 80s, I became a sci-fi guy.
Yeah.
So I started doing all these weird sci-fi things. So then, yeah, I tried to play as many different characters as I possibly could because I had alimony. Fucking show business, are you fucking bullshitting me? This is streaming live, Thomerson. I hear you. No, I feel your fucking pain. No, seriously, I had to work so much and do so many shitty movies around the world that so I could raise my son. But anyway. Yeah, I'm sorry, I lost it there for a minute.
That is Tim Thomason, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell. But so now what are you doing?
I try to, this is going to sound really funny and stupid, but I try to surf as much as I possibly can before I can't move anymore. So I go and look at the surf almost every day, and then if it's small enough to paddle out, I'll paddle out in
and you'll hang out with Letterman when he comes to town?
I go skiing with Dave. We'll go skiing a couple times a year. And I haven't skied in a couple of years, though, because my back blew out, or I had to have a back operation. But I had dinner with him, but we text and talk once in a while.
But there was just a group of guys about the same age, you and Letterman, George Miller, Dreesen, Witherspoon.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys, you really looked out for us younger guys when we came up, you know.
Well, you know, nobody was looking out for us. Because the demarcation from the Jackie Gales and the Corbett Monicas and the Jack Carter, even though Jack Carter was a good guy, great guy, but there was no Sammy Shore was good to the young guys. Yeah. But, you know, and I experienced this back east when I lived in New York, is that Sandy Barron and all the, remember Broadway Danny Rose?
Sure.
Okay, the opening of that, remember all those old comics sitting around, say, I got to write Danny Rose story for you. Well, all those comics, Will Jordan and those guys, but Will Jordan, he was good to me. Those guys, they didn't embrace the young guys so quickly, you know. Because they were the guys then, right? So then we came along, and then you all younger folks came along, and then so we tried to shepherd each other through this, you know, because you know this business, and as you guys know, this is not an easy business.
Well, the truth is, I was at my very first party up at Fort Bursky on
Fort Bursky
up on North Laurel, about a month or two into L.A. and I'd just gotten hired at the door, and Alan Bursky and Helen and this whole group of Comedy Store comics were at this party at the Bursky's house, and this guy made me feel like I belonged. I never told you this, but Biff Maynard again came up to me and he said, Argus, this is at the party. He said, I hear you hang out at the Polo Lounge. Who's that named after? Marco Polo? And I said, no, Biff, it's named after Genghis Lounge. He said, Genghis Lounge? He ran over and told you, and then you ran around and told everybody at the party that I topped Biff, and suddenly I was cool.
I have no memory of that, but I
couldn't make it up.
That was quite a place, Fort Bursky. That was.
Yeah, this was an apartment complex a block north of Sunset on.
It was right above the Laugh Stop, right above Greenblatt, right?
Above Greenblatt. Yeah. And we had maybe about 15 comedians, a Lawrence Welk singer, a middle-aged white pimp, 4 coke dealers, and 2 orchestra conductors. Whatever group did Rosanna and Rosanna Arquette.
Was Rosanna Arquette living there?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Not kidding at all.
I wonder why I never got in there. Really?
Yeah. And these were golden times, and
that I didn't know.
Yeah. But you reigned over it, and we had times we'll never forget. And I'm telling you, we're going to have you back, and we're going to talk some more about.
Well, good, because the first couple of minutes of this thing, I couldn't remember my name. Once the kid told me we're streaming live, the Marine Corps over there.
Well, you were always best live, and you're always welcome here, Timmy.
Well, thank you, sir.
Nice to have you here. Tim Thomason.
Thank you.
And we're going to be right back with a funny man, a real headliner, ladies and gentlemen, Tim Gaither. Stay tuned. Hamilton, and we have with us a real headliner. I'm so glad we were able to get him for this show. We had Tim Thomason, and now we have the one and only Tim Gaither, ladies and gentlemen. Let him hear it. Nice to have you here, Tim.
Thanks for having me, August.
Nice to have you.
Thanks for having me.
You're known as a really headliner on the road. Tell me where you've been performing.
I was just in Plano at Hyenas, which is a nice little chain. They've got one in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Plano.
How many minutes do they have you do?
About 50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you like to talk about?
It's always got to have a grain of truth to it in order for it to be funny for me. So that's mainly where my stuff comes from. I usually write most of my best stuff on stage. You know, I mean, I sit down and try to write and all that stuff, but I'm not like you seem to be able to just come up with jokes all the time that work. And the stuff that I write down does okay, but mainly it's the stuff that I just come up with on stage, and I try to remember just to do it that way every time.
I do that writing you're talking about just to stay busy. I have the same experience. Anything I say on stage, twice as good as anything I can put down. Yeah. And so you slowly build an act, and a second act, and a third act.
Yeah. And
how many Showtime specials you do?
And like you just keep. Like I tell people all the time, I had 30 minutes for like 10 years because you write something better. And then you're like, well, I can't, in good conscience, keep doing that piece of crap when I've got this, you know. So then you take away this piece of crap and you stick in a better bit, but then, you know, and then your 30 minutes just keep getting tighter and tighter. And
it's one crap after the next.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of crap are you talking about now?
Well, I'm going to have a kid in 3 months.
Wow. Hey, congratulations.
Appreciate it. Yeah, a little boy. I'm very excited about it. Ever since I found out it was going to be a little boy, I've had a lot less anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a little girl would drive me into prison or an early grave, one of the two.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited about that. But I've been talking about that a little bit on stage. But it's funny. People have been asking me for almost 20 years now what I talk about on stage, and I'm like, I don't know. I just. You know.
Well, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Arkansas. I lived there till I was about 5, and I grew up in Kansas City.
Where in Arkansas?
It was a place called Camden.
Camden?
Is where I was born, and then I lived in a place called Hampton until I was about 5. And then I grew up in Kansas City and started comedy. And
that's right.
Yeah.
Kansas City.
Yeah.
My mother had labor pains with me in Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And this is true. Daddy drove her 80 miles an hour across the border, so I would not be born in Arkansas. Like Oklahoma's an upgrade.
Right, yeah, I don't blame him. When I was a kid, we didn't even have, I went to school in Kansas City, but we didn't even have kindergarten. They just pushed you straight to first grade in Arkansas. Yeah. So I don't know what that says about the education system, but.
Did they give you a lot of grief about your accent when you were a little kid?
Yeah, I got in some trouble with it when I was about 5. I remember saying, "Yes, ma'am," and the teacher thought I was being a smartass. And I got in trouble for it. And I remember going home and telling my mom I got in trouble for saying, "Yes, ma'am." And where I grew up, if you didn't say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, that's what got you in trouble. Yeah. So to get in trouble for saying it was just more than my 5-year-old brain could handle. And my mom wrote her this letter and said, "That's how we talk where I'm from, and I don't understand why you think that's disrespectful." And that was the only time that kindergarten teacher was nice to me, was after that.
Your first introduction to the Yankee world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are your career plans right now? What do you plan on doing?
You know, I love what I'm doing. I'm on the road probably 25, 30 weeks a year, which they're not full weeks. You know, it sounds a lot more than it is, but you know, weeks these days are Thursday through Saturday or Sunday. So
that gives you time to be home.
Yeah, I'm on the road probably about 10 days a month, and I find that if I don't get to do 45, 50 an hour at least 10 or 12 times a month, I go a little crazy. Sure. You know. It's a big adjustment going from the road where you do 45 to an hour to back here where 15, 20 is the maximum set you're going to get. People would think that would be easier, but it's actually harder because I have to edit so much stuff, and 10, 15 minutes goes so fast. That's the biggest challenge for me, is coming back here, but it's good to flex both of those.
Do you like to work out new material in Los Angeles at the clubs?
Yes, and especially the Comedy Store, and especially late night. Yeah. Like, I've been working on a lot of stuff at the Comedy Store, especially late night, that if I ever get famous, it's going to be hilarious. Right. And right now, it just kind of gets me stared at. You know what I mean? But when you're famous, you get that little extra bump, you know? Yeah. Like I heard a story about Sam Kinison, how he was in La Jolla at the Comedy Store doing all the same material, and they were just staring at him like he was teaching them math or something. And then he did that 5 minutes on HBO and came back to La Jolla and was destroying. And he went behind stage and told somebody, he was like, "I'm doing the exact same shit. They're just okay with it now because I've got 5 minutes on HBO." So a lot of this stuff I'm working on, I'm like, I know that's good. And it gets laughs, especially late at night, but right now, I try to test it out on the road, and they're like, "Yeah, you're not quite famous enough to pull that off."
Well, you know, Gary Shandling had the best line on that. He said, "The great thing about being famous is you don't have to open with your best joke."
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
did you know Shandling very well?
Yeah. He was Mitzi starved him. Mitzi made him wait 6 years to become regular.
Really?
Yeah. And then once he was a regular, he was ready to guest host the Tonight Show.
Yeah, I watched that documentary, that 4-hour, or I think it was even longer than that. Yeah. It was awesome. And I love the part where him and Seinfeld come up here, and Shandling is like, "I don't want to come to the Comedy Store. It's got that weird feeling. It makes me feel weird." And Seinfeld's like, "Yeah, I know. I get that too. Let's just go in." And when I heard that, I was like, "Oh, everybody gets that way, even those guys, you know." Because I've been doing this for a living now for 18 years, and I'll headline A rooms, and then I'll come back here, and when they say, "Oh, you're second," I'm like, "Okay," but in my head, I'm like, "Huh, shit." Like I've never done it a day in my life, at least for a few minutes, and then I'm like, "Just relax and do what you do." But
and you always kill here. You always kill.
Well, thanks. I don't know about always, but I
every time I've seen you.
Well, thanks, man.
No prisoners.
That means a lot to me. It really does. You have no idea how much you've influenced me without you and I ever really talking all that much. Not that we've never talked, but like I quit drinking about 8 years ago, and you know, you were a big influence on that. You know, just because I watched from afar, like that guy. You know, you certainly got to party and have the best of both worlds, because now you've been sober all this time, but you've got some great stories.
Well, I learned that alcohol is not the answer. It was always my first guess.
Yeah, it was it was getting out of hand for me. Like, I could drink almost a fifth of Captain Morgan by myself.
Sure.
And it's always free.
By the way, the model for Captain Morgan has about 21 years sobriety.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny. I did not know that.
Yeah. And I always say, I wonder why comedians are screwed up. Look, it takes a different personality to stand in front of strangers and demand love, affection, and laughter every 15 seconds on cue.
Yeah.
I always say, don't feel badly about being addicted to this, that, and the other, and being a stand-up. I say, funny isn't free.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's a great point. I even, a few years ago, I was going through, speaking of nerves, it's actually been a couple years ago. I'd been doing it for 16 years for a living at this point, and all of a sudden I was getting just anxiety like you wouldn't believe. Like days in advance before I would go on the road, and I was like, what the hell is going on with me? Am I going to have to quit doing this? And I read something and it just dawned on me. It was like, this isn't life or death. You know, like, it feels like it sometimes, but it's not. You know, like, even if they stare at you for 15 minutes and you don't get a laugh at all, it sucks. Yeah. But it's not going to kill you, you know. And something, I don't know where I read that, and I read about people that go through that, like baseball players that forget to go throw to first and all this stuff.
Yeah.
My friend Alan Havey, who you probably know. Sure. He confided in me one night. He was like, I went through that in my early 40s and finally went away, but hearing that and seeing those Shandling episodes and all those kind of things, it always makes me feel better about that. And even hearing that Richard Pryor, like you guys were talking about, how nervous he used to get sometimes, I'm like, it's just natural.
Here's a mantra you can say to yourself for that situation.
Okay.
To whoever it was that stole my Paxil, I hope you're happy now. And suddenly it's not about you anymore. You go kill that crowd like you were born to kill it.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, how crazy anxious you can be, and then as soon as they say your name, it's like, you don't got time for that crap. It's over, you know, like you just, I wrestled my whole life, and it's almost like when they blow the whistle, it's like, you don't got time to be nervous. You're going to get your ass kicked.
Well, I found out that sometime around 10 or 15 years of sobriety, I found out that the stage is the one place I'm happiest. Yeah. It's the one place I can love and be loved in equal amounts. Yeah. And so I found that my anxiety before going on stage is I just don't want to forget that new material I wanted to share with them. Yeah. That's what my concern is now. Yeah. So I'll bring notes out there, but that doesn't mean I'm going to look at them. That doesn't mean I'm going to happen to focus on the right.
Do you ever get that feeling where right when your set will be going along fine, and then you start to go into something new, and you can feel your heart beating a little faster and your throat tightening up a little bit? Does that ever still happen to you?
Whenever I try to do something on the news to millennials.
Okay.
And it's not about the Kardashians, it's not about drugs, it's not about race, and they're going, slow down.
Yeah. I've been talking about some stuff lately that's a little, when they're younger, they don't. I've got a joke I've been doing about the Bible, and I realize how many younger people have not read the Bible. I'm like, well, that's why they're staring at you jackass. They don't know anything about the Bible, you know.
That's funny, especially in between New York and L.A. That's scary.
Yeah.
You expect that would kill there.
Yeah. The Midwest, and then you get the older crowds there that are like, I don't know if it's okay to laugh at that, you know, that kind of stuff, which is. You guys were talking a little bit about Kenneth Center. We were talking about him. That was the first guy that I watched that made me laugh at things I knew I wasn't supposed to be laughing at. You know, like I was raised Southern Baptist, and he was talking about Jesus getting nailed to the cross and all that stuff, and
he would say Jesus would be up in heaven, and he would say, "Yeah, I'll come back. Yeah, you know, as soon as I can play the piano again."
Yeah, all that stuff about nailing it.
No longer whistles in my hand. Oh, he took no prisoners.
Yeah, and the stuff about the sand. You see this? You see what it is? It's sand. You know it's going to be 100 years? It's going to be sand. You live in the desert. You don't know what food is. I was crying. I was like 11 years old crying, and I was like, I'm not supposed to be laughing at this, but it's so funny. I can't help it. And that's to me still the funniest stuff, is the stuff you're not supposed to be talking about and still get laughs about it.
When does that stuff occur to you to share to the audience? At what point? When you're just daydreaming or exercising or on stage?
A lot of times it's on stage that I'll get.
You get a real friendly crowd. You know you can go anywhere with them.
Yeah, especially like I like to open up real strong for about the first 15 minutes, especially on the road.
Yeah,
and then,
insurance.
Yeah, and then let them know I'm funny and all that, and then start getting into stuff that really means something to me. But it's a huge art form to be able to talk about things that matter and still get laughs. Like, because if you're not doing that, you're just on a soapbox, and nobody wants to hear that shit. Like, you have to be funny with it. Like Bill Hicks, he's the biggest reason I started doing comedy. Yeah. And the stuff he talked about, the Kennedy assassination and George Bush Part 1 and all that stuff, it was so freaking funny. But a lot of people tried to do that, it seemed like. This guy that influenced me a lot when I was starting out, he's a booker, he wasn't a comic. He was like, Bill Hicks almost ruined comedy because so many people tried to be like him, and they couldn't. Because there's only one, there's only a handful of guys that can do that.
Well, if you read Rich Scheidner's book about stand-up comedy, have you read it?
I have not.
Because he's on the road a lot with Bill in the early 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. And he paid the price. He stayed up till 6:30 every morning, honing that stuff out, and you try it out on your fellow comics, and you finally he would do it every single night. He worked his tail off to get it that good.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, I helped kidnap him from his father in 1980 and had him stay up at Crest.
Bill Hicks?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a little, what you call the mascot of the Kennison gang back in Houston.
Okay.
He was the first to come out here. Okay. They'd seen me and Ollie Joe perform at a Showtime competition in Houston in late '79, and they decided they were going to come out. Okay. And Bill was the first one. And his father didn't know it. He ran away from home. And Mitzi put him up at Crest Hill, and nobody said a word. But at the time, he drove Mitzi crazy on stage as a doorman because he would just pause for like 8 seconds before his next thought. Yeah. And she would say something, But he started talking faster.
Yeah. Well, I was in college and getting ready to graduate, or I was getting ready to enter the School of Education. I was going to teach and coach wrestling because I didn't know what else to do. Yeah. And
that sounds gay. I'm sorry. This is very politically incorrect.
Well, I was going to teach and coach wrestling. I didn't know what else to do. And the closer I got...
The priesthood was out.
Right, exactly. The closer I got to entering the School of Education, I started having all this anxiety about it. And my friend was like, you got to listen to this CD. And it was Bill Hicks. Mm-hmm. And I went to the counselor and changed my major the next day. I was like, I'm going to be a comedian. I was like, that's the funniest guy I've ever heard. And at that point, I had never heard of him, which means I can do this for a living even if I never get famous. And I changed my major the next day. And my counselor was like, I was like, I want to be a comedian, but I got all these credits, I might as well get a degree. Yeah. She's like, well, you can get a social science degree next semester. I was like, sign me up, sister. I'll take one of those.
Where did you first start your open mic nights?
In Kansas City at Stanford & Sons.
Oh, that was a good club.
It was an awesome club.
Was it about 300-seater or something like that?
Yeah, and it was perfect. It had the low ceilings, and it was just the right width.
I remember hearing about that.
Very similar to the OR.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had this black and white check stage, and a stage you could lean on, a wall back that you could lean on, and to this day, I like a stage I can lean against.
Well, to close up, if you're going to start doing, say, Showtime specials and force yourself to come up with a new hour every year, what club would you probably want to show it in or shoot it in?
Probably here. I would think, yeah. It's a club in LA. Yeah. And the Comedy Magic Club is great too.
Yeah,
that's a great times there. And
it was opened with Mitzi's blessing. She went down to see Mike Lacey and was there for the grand opening.
Really?
She loved it. She did what she could to help Mike.
Awesome. And she gives me a lot of hope. She's 43 in the place. Yeah. So, that's not super young to start out the way she did and end up the way she was. I mean, a freaking legend. So
well, we all owe everything to Mitzi Shore. We agree to that.
Yeah.
Tim, so glad to have you.
Yeah, it's great.
And all you folks go out and see Tim when he comes to your town, and we'll look for you soon on Showtime and on Comedy Central. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Tim Gaither, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic. Well, that's our show for tonight, but tune in next Tuesday. We've got a great show already lining up for you. We had a fantastic time, and I again, want to thank our studio audience here tonight. You're the best audience we've had in 5 tapings, so thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I'm Marcus Hamilton. Welcome again to the Comedy Store tonight. We'll see you next Tuesday, and Google us on YouTube all week long. We'll be here. Same interviews. Promise.